how much did you sell for?
44 million.
What's it like when you see that money hit your account?
I write in my book, people have compared it to having sex.
1968, you got drafted to the Vietnam War. You went into war with the mindset that I'm gonna die.
Right, there's a whole other world out there we can't imagine.
How many people did you ultimately kill?
Over 600 people.
You discovered John Cena.
Right.
Could you walk us through that exact story of how you convinced John Cena to get into wrestling?
He was unbelievably focused or driven. He was a machine. You can have the gift, the talent, you can get lucky, but then you've got to execute.
How old are you now?
80.
I think you're the sharpest damn 80-year-old I've ever seen. If you have one guiding principle for the younger generation, what would that be?
People don't understand that.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the School of Hard Knocks podcast. I'm James, and I'm here with Jack and Josh, and we've got an incredible guest for you guys today. We're out in Los Angeles interviewing Ed Connors. Ed, you've lived multiple lifetimes in one, to say the least. I mean, you're one of the most fascinating people that I've ever met, and I've interviewed some incredible people. You bought the original Gold's Gym in 1979, grew it to over 700 locations. You eventually sold the gym franchise.
Right.
But before that, you were an architect designing some of the most influential buildings in Beverly Hills. You also mentored and helped shape the careers of some of the most prominent celebrities in today's world. But I want to go back to the very beginning. 1968, you got drafted to the Vietnam War. What's your mindset like in that very moment, right? Because that was your first career, was in the military?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Well, I had worked as a kid, paper route, shoveling snow, raking leaves, the usual activities of people in that era. And I'd worked all the summers and from school, usually in an architectural office in Omaha, or I also got involved with a number of other small businesses. But so it wasn't. I was wanting to begin my architecture career, but I was drafted for the Army, and I thought I was going to die. That was my mindset. But you live in a democracy, and you have to go with the majority of the voters at the time. I think believed the war in Vietnam was justified, and I had gone to UC Berkeley, so I was all part of that anti-war movement because I just saw it as a civil war. And I don't think our country has really learned because we got involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, which are basically civil wars. So, no, I thought I was going to die.
So you thought you were going to die?
Yeah.
When you went over there, what were you doing for those that don't know?
I was in military intelligence, and I was basically targeting airstrikes, primarily B-52 airstrikes. And people don't understand that we talk about nuclear war, but 3 B-52s in formation and dropping their bomb loads can take out an area 1 by 3 kilometers. It would turn it to dust.
Yeah.
So it's basically a nuclear bomb without the radioactive aspect.
So you went into war with the mindset that I'm going to die.
Right.
But we were talking about earlier that you learned something from yourself in combat, that you're a lot tougher than you realized at the time. What was it that you realized, and what was that turning point, right? Because, you ended up earning a lot of stars ultimately from, the sacrifices that you made and what you were able to do defending your country.
Right.
What was it that you learned about yourself that you took, beyond combat into the real world?
I learned you don't need all the paraphernalia that we think you have to survive. I mean, basically, a sleeping bag and a duffel bag or whatever, or a backpack. That's it. I mean, again, the veneer of civilization is very thin. I left Berkeley thinking everybody needs an Eames lounge chair and all this beautiful architecture, and find out that we're pretty much savages. It's amazing how basic you can survive and get by. I don't ever remember eating anything great. I was there for 21 months. I actually extended beyond the normal tour of duty because after a while you begin to think you're going to live forever. Mm-hmm. You think this is not your time to die. And if I extended in Vietnam and had 5 months left of service, I would be discharged early. So you'd understand this with your military background, but there were ways to get out earlier if you extended in country. And of course, that's the difference between, say, Vietnam War, and it's kind of fascinating that I think most of the soldiers that were in Iraq or Afghanistan served 6-month tour of duty, but that's unfortunately when it's time to go home. That's when you actually are the most valuable because you've learned so much. So being in country in Vietnam for 12 months, I had learned a lot, and the fact that I stayed on for another 9, the Army wanted that because I had learned to survive, and I had learned a lot about local customs, which made a big difference.
And it kind of reminds me of that perspective shift that, a lot of people have when you went into war zone. Like Jack and I, we were fortunate to be able to see the world at an early age.
Right.
Growing up in a military household,
Yeah.
we lived in South Korea.
Right.
One of the countries that we visited was actually Cambodia.
Right.
And it's a very poverty-stricken country where
right.
you'd see 9-year-old kids floating around in the river in a trash can lid with their arm cut off.
Yeah.
Did you have that realization when you were in a war zone, in combat, that my problems that I thought were so big were nothing compared to the stuff that you had to see when you were over there?
Well, exactly. And that's my hope with all the men that I figured how many millions of Americans that men have been through and women have been through the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but they're seeing a third world country for the first time. And, I had been to Europe. I went to Europe when I was 18 as part of a high school tour. So I was a traveler. I loved to travel, but I had never been to a third world country. And, that was a shock. And I'm sure it was for a lot of American men and women that, there's a whole other world out there we can't imagine. And I know it was amazing. I could never get over how clean and beautiful the Vietnamese women looked, in spite of the fact that they were basically in mud patties. They were wearing, I think they call them odais. They're beautiful silk dresses or whatever they're made of, but they look gorgeous, and they survived with that.
And you ended up receiving a Bronze Star ultimately.
I got a couple of them, yeah.
And what did you get the stars for?
I basically got it for my targeting of this airstrikes.
So to put it in perspective, how many people did you ultimately kill?
Well, one of them was for wiping out a North Vietnamese regiment.
How many people?
Which would be over 600 people.
So you were about the business over there.
Well, again, once you're there, it becomes a band of brothers where you're concerned about doing your job well so that others will live. And again, these are bombs that they couldn't be turned into food to feed the poor. This is the military-industrial complex that built all this ammunition. It's going to get spent anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might as well target it effectively.
Going from war and being in that environment and then coming back to the U.S. and having to kind of integrate back into society, what was that like?
Well, that was a big shock because I'm sure you've seen in the military. When I got back to U.S. in 71, it was like there was no war going on. People could have cared less that I was in Vietnam, and I was ashamed in a way of even I didn't talk about it until the movie Platoon came out. Mm. That was kind of a game changer because that movie to me showed what the war was really like in terms of the environment. The rain was incredible. Where I was stationed in Vietnam, it rained. It was during the monsoon. It rained 75 inches a month for 1 month, for 3 months in a row. And I know because there were 600 helicopters at the base, so they were very accurate weather information. So, L.A., for example, is considered a desert. Any place is considered a desert with less than 12 inches of rain a year. L.A. gets about 3, I think. So, that was the enemy was the water, and the mud was incredible. Just the filth. I don't think I had dry underwear or socks for 21 months. No, it was. It was another world that I had never imagined. Poverty.
And one thing that I've learned is that when you are in military service, of course it's about serving your country, but it also becomes even deeper than that. It's more about the brotherhood amongst your team members. When you came back to the United States, was there an element of brotherhood and that element of just companionism missing? Did you feel a missing link there, or how was that return like?
I tried to stay in touch with a few of my people I'd made friends with over there, but I actually I'm still in touch with two of them, but most didn't want to talk about it or just went back to their own world. Most were from small town America, the South.
So you've returned back to the States.
Right.
What's next? What's the next chapter in the story? What did you get into next? Did you return back to your career, or what happened next?
I sent a letter to an architecture firm in the East Coast whose work I liked. So I said, I love your work. I want to work for you, and I got the job. So I went back to work for Kevin Roach, John Dinkeloo Associates, and Kevin Roach would be considered a starchitect in today's world, but back then they didn't have that label. So I worked on some incredible buildings and got a sense of what good design is all about. And then it was an amazing. We worked on a lot of projects which back then were getting built. So I worked on a lot of corporate headquarters.
So, a decade after Vietnam, 1979, you saved up some money from your career in architecture, right? Designing buildings in Los Angeles and Beverly Hills.
Right.
You find Gold's Gym.
Right.
It's one location at the time.
Right.
What was that conversation like going to acquire them? What did you see at the time? Because back then, like now it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's a proven model,
right?
Recurring business model. What did you see at the time in Gold's Gym?
Well, I remember. I remember going into the gym and probably in the late 70s, 77 maybe, and saying, God, it would be neat to own this. So I visualized it. And the same thing happened with my last house in Venice on the beach. I remember going to it and thinking, God, it'd be neat to own this. And
why?
Just it was a fantastic space or atmosphere. And, then with my house in Venice, I think a few weeks later, I owned it with the gym. Several years later, I ended up owning it. But I think part of it, it's thinking positive and visualizing. You really, you've got to stay positive and not think of the negatives. And it was, crazy, this architect going in Gold's Gym and thinking, God, it'd be neat to own this. And suddenly, I do. It was magical. But all because I was nice to Pete Grimkowski. I helped him get to California, become Mr. World, and he remembered that. So it was these chance encounters, which is what I was talking to you earlier about, that I think are missing with all this smart technology we have, the phones.
If I'm not mistaken, Gold's Gym was started by a gentleman named, I know his last name was Gold. What was his name?
Joe Gold.
Joe Gold. And did you approach him with your partners and have a conversation?
No, actually, Joe Gold started Gold's Gym in 1965, and then he sold it to someone who sold it to someone who sold it to us.
And this is just one location?
Yeah, just one location.
Was it struggling at the time?
It was struggling. It was, in fact, the owner at the time, Ken Sprague, his wife had just died, and she had been running the gym, and he didn't want the headaches. It was losing money. He was involved in other things in entertainment industry. So that gets back to an important point, I think, for your listeners, is that when you buy a business, you need to understand why it's failing or why it's for sale. And certainly if it's bad management, there are really three things that make up a gym: location, capital, and management. And so if you can buy a business at the right price and know that you're a better manager and have access to capital, then it makes sense. But he didn't want to pour any more money into it. When we lost money the first year we owned it, we grossed $250,000 and lost $15,000 or something, because Joe Weider pulled our ads in the magazine. And so that's when I became friends with Joe Weider to try and help him and get our ads back in the magazine.
So you were marketing through just smart magazines?
Right. Those little certain size ads in the back of the magazines, and I don't know what the counterpart is today, but those were invaluable in terms of getting income for your product.
And you didn't pay to get in the magazines either?
No.
Why not?
We made a deal with Joe that we would allow him to film in our gym, whereas the other gyms in the area wouldn't allow that. And he needed people. He needed people of the whole look of Southern California to make his magazine successful. He was selling that image, that world of health and fitness, and he needed our gym to make that sale.
Ed, when you initially bought Gold's Gym, what was that initial business plan like? What were the action steps that you were like, okay, these are the first things that we need to fix to turn this business around?
Well, the first thing I thought of was getting the magazine ads back in place, because that was a large portion of our income. Printing T-shirts was like printing money, and it still is, really. I don't know why they've gotten so expensive. We could buy in quantity a T-shirt for $2.25 silkscreen. We could sell it to our gym owners for $4.50, and they could sell it for $9.95. So everybody made money. And nowadays, the T-shirt, they're more available. Back then, it was only that you had to buy from the Southeast U.S. Now it's you buy from all over the world, and the quality is just as good or better. So it's it was, and people wanted to have a Gold's Gym. More people have worn the Gold's Gym clothing than have trained in the gyms. They wanted to identify with that healthy lifestyle, I think, because this is back in the day when AIDS was raising its ugly head. Herpes, social diseases were much in discussion, and people were not going to bars anymore. Gyms became the new bars of the 80s and 90s, because that was a place where you would go to supposedly meet healthy people.
And so when you bought that first Gold's Gym in 1979, you had those problems that you had to fix. How did you sort of transfer that in order to expand and start building new locations? What was that second location that you guys looked to expand to?
Well, this goes to how much of life is about luck or fate, because I was working for Charles Eames and Associates in Venice. And that, probably your viewers know the Eames lounge chair is one of his famous productions, or the chairs you see outside this room. There was a building a couple blocks down that was for lease, or one bay of a 4-bay warehouse. And I saw that, and I thought, and we were having trouble in Santa Monica with the police, with the landlord. And I said, why don't we move the gym back to its roots, back to Venice? So we moved the gym in 1981 back from 4,500 square feet in Santa Monica on 2nd Street to 9,100 square feet in Venice. And then over the next 9 years, we grew the gym into 26,000 square feet. So again, luck, because we were able to expand in place into each bay over time. And for the other tenants who thought we wouldn't last actually failed and moved out, and we then took over their space. So that allowed us to develop a 26,000 square foot gym, which became the model for gyms all over America for 2 decades. That was considered, that's the kind of gym you do. And I was telling James earlier, then around the year 2000, it all began to split, where you needed a low cost model, a middle model, and a high end model like Equinox or Lifetime Fitness. So again, the business was evolving, and this is what people understand. They don't understand change. Is that things, you just can't build a 35,000 square foot box like Lifetime or 24 Hour and expect it to work forever. The model has changed because of all the tech, everything around. I mean, imagine Kodak or Xerox, or think about the things that became. But if people thought they would probably last forever.
And what were some of those challenges that you faced? Like, of course, this market really well, but especially as you all decided to scale outside of maybe the Southern California area,
right?
What were some of those challenges that you faced as you scaled from location to location to location?
Well, we were licensing or franchising eventually, so it was our owners who had basically their issue was getting money, and a lot of it, of course, was family money, because banks, were not, they didn't like gyms, because they were largely a cash business. And it was basically the introduction of EFT, which started in Germany, that allowed the whole membership, the whole monthly due situation to come into existence. Without that, we could never have sold, because the private equity people couldn't trust the money.
I wanted to talk about, you said earlier that it was like 20 plus years of having to go back and forth with banks.
Yeah.
What was that shift when you kind of went to them? What did you learn about going to negotiate with the banks to get access to the capital?
Well, they wanted our cash flow. We had membership money coming in, and that was very attractive to them. And we also tried to factor our clothing business to get access to money in advance of orders, and we could show them orders. So, but it was still every year for 10 years we had to change banks, and then finally we ended up with City National Bank, and they were good. They were good to work with. I insisted on monthly meetings with our banker, and I think that's getting back again to the personal touch. If just like with the gym, if you never have contact with a human being in the gym behind the counter, you're not going to renew your membership when it comes up in a year, if that's the first time you're seeing that person.
Now, when Gold's really started to explode, going into over 30 countries, but even just throughout the U.S., right? Like the demand increasingly grew and grew and grew. What did you and your fellow owners do to ensure that the standard of each location was being met? Because I know that you placed a big emphasis on the brand of Gold's, upholding that good customer experience and having great standards at all of them. Is there something that you did to instill that in all the different people that were running the different locations?
We had 2 full-time inspectors, and I myself got involved. I loved to travel. Being an architect, I had looked on many of their plans or marked them up, and so we would go around the country. And in fact, that was kind of a funny. I remember the first board meeting I had when we sold to Brockway Moran in 1999. They said, "Ed, why are your franchise agreements only 5 years? When McDonald's is 10 and 20," and I said, "Well, that's the length of probably the likely wear of the carpet." In other words, we wanted to have a sort of a hammer to hold over their head, saying, we'll renew you, but you've got to recarpet. And this is again the days before rubber flooring. I think I invented rubber flooring because when I put down AstroTurf initially in the Gold's Gym in Venice, and when that began to wear out, I think, well, this is not going to work long term. But there was no rubber flooring industry back then, so we bought a used conveyor belt and glued down, and that worked.
Do you have a story about a time where you went to go inspect a location and there was just some bad shit going on there, or you were just like...
Well, funny stuff, because we pioneered co-ed fitness, and I remember going to a gym, and I think it was Ventura, and the owner said, "Well, we don't have many women members." And when I went into his women's locker room, I saw why, because they had gang showers for the women. And back in the day, gang showers for the men, which I had seen in the Army and which were kind of popular among private, men's clubs back then, worked. But then very quickly in Venice, we had to put up partitions. But yeah, you can't expect to draw female members if you're going to give them gang showers.
And your background's in architecture.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how did that kind of play a role in the design and the creating of the atmosphere of the Gold's Gym with that background?
I think it played a big role because, it's just common sense stuff that you think of. The architects were so geared to thinking about how people use the space. For instance, in a locker, room, first off, it's typically probably the only area you're going to get a restroom in the gym. So you want to make it so somebody could go in and out quickly without going through the wet area or the locker area. And that's where you get the theft, you get the dry feet mixing with the wet feet. It's just common sense to lay it out so that doesn't happen. And of course, it always amazed me that with most building departments, we had to put in more toilets, water closets, urinals than the average restaurant. Where are you more likely to need to go to the bathroom, restroom? Most of these, so many restaurants, even in L.A., it's a one-holer. It's ridiculous. So, common sense stuff like that. Or you put your leg area in the back. You don't want to have people come in and see, that area necessarily because it'll scare them. I would put cardio up front in some way because people say, well, yeah, I can ride a bike. I could join this gym.
So it's almost like you designed it in a way to cater towards the beginners.
Yeah.
And it's always about like you're putting the customer experience first. And what are the things that just like from the initial location to scaling, what are the key things about talking to the customer and learning about customer experience? What are some of those things that you learned about just developing the best product possible?
again, I think I had 537 house guests over the last 45 years. I think their feedback was invaluable in getting what they like or dislike about the gym. Like the music was a big deal. I talk about this in my book. People don't realize it, but back then that was the common vibe. And nowadays everybody's got something in their head. I mean, it's Walkmans and earbuds and headsets. Now they're on their own little world, and that really is a downer. I mean, people say, how come why was the gym so exciting when you owned it? Well, it was largely the music. It made a big difference. So simple things like that. I mean, how many restaurants or bars you go in these days and you can barely talk because the music's, and there's all this distraction, all this shit on the wall that these who wants to watch golf or hockey, and you can't even talk. Your people are on their phones, they're not engaged with each other.
And I think it's just a testament of why Gold's was so successful. Is because it's the attention to those small details. Something you mentioned about restaurants, and a personal pet peeve of mine is when they have the screeching loud chairs, when in reality it's probably 25 cents to just put a little thing on the bottom of it, so the chairs don't squeak very loud. It's just like
those details are important.
What most people don't know, when we walked into this building today to do this podcast, we walked in and you took a look at the ceiling and you took a look at the tile on the ground, and you could tell very specific details about it. So you can tell the passion is still there from an architecture standpoint. Why did you want to become an architecture? Because obviously that shaped later on to help impact the expansion of the specific Gold's Gym locations. Why did you want to become an architect? Like what was your feeling behind that?
It was the earliest memory I had of I came to Disneyland for the grand opening in 1955. My grandfather was vice president of the Union Pacific, and he had a private railroad car. So my grandmother, who was very influential in my life, said, "Well, let's go to the grand opening." So I remember coming here, and I still have the postcard I sent back home from the hotel downtown on Pershing Square, and I said, I want to live here. I want to be an architect, because it was just LA was so exciting. And again, I think that's part of one of the messages in my book is that you need to move to a big city, I think, to really develop your potential. Unfortunately, you can't do it in Nosebleed, Iowa. You got to move to the big city.
You got to get to where the money is.
Yeah.
So, you took the inspiration of being an architect in to help you design the gyms. I'm going to assume that one of the things that the Vietnam War taught you was brotherhood and camaraderie. And to me, when I think of the gym business, the fitness industry, I don't just think of it as going to work out and self-improve and change your lives. Right. I can say for the three of us, we've met some of our best friends in the gym. Right. It's the community aspect. How big of an emphasis, as you're growing, expanding this to over 700 locations, how big of an emphasis was community and brotherhood when you were building these gyms?
It was huge. And that was one reason we had an annual convention in Las Vegas, because everybody loves going there. And we could get we gave our owners 3 free room nights in one of the major hotels on the Strip. So they were all together for at least 3 days, maybe longer. And that built that camaraderie. And then they probably learned more from interacting with each other than they did from any of our seminars, because they were getting real life stories about how to run their business. That was huge.
And one of the things I'm learning from you right now is that, Ed, you didn't leave any money on the table in the sense of, not only did you have the gyms, right? You ended up buying the real estate, but you have the recurring revenue coming in from the subscriptions to the gym. You had events, you had merch. How important was it for you in the fitness industry to vertically integrate and kind of own all the different aspects of the businesses that you're involved in?
I think it's very important for an owner to own the real estate as easily or quickly as possible, because there are so many bad landlords out there. I mean, you can see it right now in LA. I mean, it was so much empty. People are not being realistic or smart, and there are a lot of dumb. I mean, when we bought the gym in Santa Monica, we had a horrible landlord, and I could see it going nowhere with his attorneys. In fact, how horrible it was. Peter Blake, who was the star of a TV series, eventually lost a case regarding murdering his wife. So I mean, that's the kind of person, we were renting from, which we had inherited when we bought the gym. So, yeah, I think the more you can own, the better, because you have control over it.
And how did you ultimately own the real estate at a lot of these locations? Was it just from getting the money from, that first gym that you had bought, and then you're like, okay, when we get this next location, we're going to buy the real estate, or what was that process?
I think part of it was, finding the right kind of building or owner, or being able to see the building. Well, there are many stories there, but if you could see an older owner and knowing that his kids would probably inherit the building, but they would want to sell it right away, that was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, there's certain types of, so it's really important to get to know your landlord, and that's the most crucial time in a business, when you can walk away from the deal. So don't rush into. We had too many gym owners who, in the back of their mind, they bought the franchise, they want to open in 3 months or 5 months, whatever. But that time to negotiate a lease or find a building is really important.
And so, despite being around a ton of bodybuilders your whole life,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you've always been the guy in the suit and tie.
Yeah.
And even on the cover of your book, it's you
Right.
in a suit and tie with
Yeah.
two bodybuilders.
Right.
And so, what brought you to this culture and this community, despite coming from more of a business architect
I think, well,
background?
this is my body armor. One of my house guests, Bob Paris, wrote a wonderful book called Gorilla Suit. So when you see these big guys, I think that muscle is their blue blazer. In fact, I wore a blue blazer almost every day. I had a half a dozen, and I would wear one every day for the entire time. And so they called me the Blue Blazer. And in fact, one of the wrestlers even adopted that name in the ring. He was the Blue Blazer. But I think part of it is, well, yeah, I'm there. I'm the businessman. I'm there to teach you the business. Pete and Tim, who are bodybuilders, would wear their gym clothes. They're there to help you train. Pete was Mr. World. Tim was Mr. Empire State. They were passionate about fitness, and Tim was really into the equipment, which is key to get somebody who has a passion for fitness, who loves the gym equipment.
For the people watching,
Uh-huh.
right? You had how many house guests, did you say?
537.
Can you give some context to them of some of these people that you brought into your house and ultimately mentored? Give them some of these names that you used to work with.
Well, in the back of my book, I summarize the various where they some of them ended up. 102 were pro bodybuilders, I think. 70 some were gym owners. 23 started supplement companies that probably did $1 billion last year in sales.
Give us an idea of some of these names. Who were some of these people?
Well, you may not. Well, I don't know if people would know them. Gerard Dente or Rich Gaspari. Gaspari Nutrition, or Gerard Dente had Muscle Meds and MHP.
Yeah.
Dave Ender's company called You.
Jay Cutler was another one.
Jay Cutler now has his own supplement company.
And who are some of the wrestlers?
Jim Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior, Sting, Randy Orton,
John Cena. So let me ask you this. Among all of the people that kind of came under your belt, that you had mentored,
Right.
you had, had the chance to really see them really come up, what is it that separated the ones that made it and the ones that didn't?
They didn't believe in themselves as much as I did. I tell people, if you look at those 537 names, if more of them believed in themselves as much as I did, there'd be more John Cenas or Jay Cutlers.
So John Cena had like an unwavering belief
He
in
was
himself.
he was unbelievably focused or driven. He was a machine.
Was that innate, or was it with the community that he had around him?
He had a goal. I mean, like when his first wife came out to stay with him in one of my homes in Venice, she didn't like Venice is kind of an acquired taste. I don't know if you've been down there,
Yeah.
but it doesn't agree with everybody. And she didn't like it, and she sent her back home to Boston. I said, John, if it's meant to be, you'll marry her 10 years from now. And he ended up marrying her 12 years, I think, later, but it lasted less than 2 years because he had this goal in his mind. I mean, these wrestlers are on the road 25 days a month.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lifestyle. You can't, and John, I think, has given up having kids because he realizes he couldn't raise them properly. So he's on his second marriage with a beautiful Iranian woman from Iran. But no, it's all about, again, you can have the gift, the talent, you can get lucky, but then you've got to execute. And a lot of people just, they give up too early.
So I know we're talking about him, but I don't think enough people realize you discovered John Cena.
Right.
Could you walk us through that exact story of how you convinced John Cena to get into wrestling?
Well, he talks about it in the forward in my book, in his version, and I have my version later on in the book. But we both agree that he was on spring break. He was out to see a girlfriend in L.A., and he was training at Gold's Gym Venice. And I saw him working out. And I think I was telling you earlier, I think living in L.A., you begin to look at people and think, oh yeah, he looks kind of like a Matt Damon or Mark Wahlberg or whatever. And Mark Wahlberg was Marky Mark back then. He was training in the gym. And I think, he looks like a big Mark Wahlberg or big Matt Damon. So I approached him in the parking lot. I remember I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, have you ever thought about pro wrestling? And his exact words, he said, it would be my dream. But he said, there's just no way I could ever do that. I don't, I'm going through college. No, I couldn't possibly get out here to pursue wrestling school, whatever. I said, well, I could make that happen. So he came out after he graduated. Stayed in my home, I think, about 5 months with other house guests going through, and went to wrestling school. And back in the day, it was harder because rather than going to the training center in Orlando now, you have to go to a wrestling school in the city, wherever you are. So he beat out the talent. He was discovered essentially by the WWE scouts. I mean, I may have said something to them, but they gave him a contract 18 months later after I met him.
And what was your affiliation with the WWE in the wrestling world? How did you kind of get into that, for those that don't know?
In the early 80s, Vince McMahon tried to buy us. He was consolidating wrestling leagues all over the U.S., but this is when the Gold's Gyms are beginning to pop up all over the country. And he saw his wrestlers training in our gyms. There was no other place to train. And they would put on a Gold's Gym T-shirt. They would go in the ring in front of 15,000 people in the hometown, tear off the shirt, and then do maybe even a TV show out from that town. So our Vince McMahon, I think, as a marketing genius he is, well, I'm giving the Gold's Gym all this free publicity. I might as well own it. Again, your vertical integration. Mm-hmm. So we met with him, but we asked, in his opinion, for too much money. But ironically, it's what we sold for, many years later.
And how much did you sell for?
$44 million. I remember asking Vince for $40 million.
And he said no at first.
No.
So you didn't settle.
No.
I gotta ask you. You sell.
Yeah.
What's it like when you see that money hit your account?
Well, I write in my book, people have compared it to having sex, and I would agree. When it hits, you call your bank and it hits your accounts, it's pretty fantastic.
I love that.
What did that day look like? Did you do anything to celebrate? Well, what did that day look like for you?
I didn't really. I took stock and note and less cash to do the deal to make it work. My partner Pete took more, so I didn't really. I had enough cash to pay off my mortgage, my beach house. So that's immediately what I did with that money. 5 years later, when I got the rest of my money, that's when I went out and had a nice meal. But I was telling James that I'd always had in the back of my mind some expensive car, but I ended up buying a used Mercedes convertible for $15,000 because I'd had several of them, and one of them had belonged to the Ultimate Warrior. But I loved, again, design-wise, I think the old Mercedes convertibles are just a beautiful classic. Mm-hmm. And so I that's what I bought. But it can't buy happiness, but it buys freedom.
Yeah. So Ed, we talked about it earlier that a lot of your mentors died when you were really young. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of collapse time real quick for everybody watching right now, but then also, to really figure out what it is that you instilled in all the people that were coming up when they were young. What are some of those lessons that you instilled in them that you would instill in your younger self, at a time when maybe you had lost your mentors? But let's go to that younger version of you who was aspiring to be a learner and a sponge. And if he had the opportunity to get mentored from you, what are those lessons that you would?
It's so important to be positive. You've got to find out what's good in you and be very positive about it. You can't ever be negative. In other words, you've got a team. You need to find out what each person does well and encourage that. Right. And you can't be negative at all. I mean, people would joke with me, Ed, if you told someone they look small 3 times a day, they'd probably go kill themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to be very careful about what I would. I mean, I would get resumes, photographs or videos of people saying, "Well, Ed, do you think I could be Mr. Olympia?" Well, I wouldn't lie to them, but I'm not going to also encourage something I don't see. So I was kind of the guy behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz for many years, because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, and I've learned from you and just the most successful people that we've met and that we've interviewed, the power and the importance of mentorship. And it's a big reason why we actually started and built one of the biggest communities for business owners in the entire world. It's called the School of Mentors. And every single week, we literally give access to people all over the world to come in on live calls and get access to the multimillionaire and billionaire entrepreneurs that we interview, just like yourself. Yeah. And so for everybody watching right now, guys, if you guys want the ability to get mentored every week from the millionaire and billionaire entrepreneurs that we interview and ask your specific questions to them on live calls, we built the #1 community for business owners, over 4,000 members, and live calls every week with heavy hitters. So go down to the link in the description of this video to join the community. We can't wait to see you on the inside. But back to kind of another question. Who were those people, or not those people, your parents? Any specific lessons that they taught you? You mentioned that they were depression parents.
Right.
What did you learn from your mom and dad?
I think I learned the value of work. We weren't given anything, and you were expected, and even though my dad was a surgeon, you were expected to work from day one. I had a paper route from the earliest day I can remember, and I remember always, raking leaves or shoveling snow for money in Omaha, Nebraska. And every summer I worked. It was just understood that you were going to work somewhere. My dad was a doctor to a number of factories, so in high school, I worked at, like Continental Can, or I got blue collar work and saw that. And I think these are, great life experiences. But my parents were, overly cautious again. They never had credit cards or debit card, whatever. They always would say, "Well, Ed, be careful, you might get hurt." But my grandparents were saying, "Ed, God, you're incredible. You could do anything." And my grandfather, I'll never forget, he was vice president of Union Pacific. He was in charge of operations. He had 60,000 men under him, and I was in awe of him. And I would say that quite often to him. And he said, Ed, when he retired, he said, "Ed, the smart ones left for the airlines." So in other words, he was saying, "Well, yeah, I was successful in that, but I didn't have the foresight to know to leave for the airline industry," which a lot of, I guess, railroad people did. They saw the future in that.
There's a saying that we love here at the School of Hard Knocks. I want to go back to scaling.
Yeah.
Is the saying that we love is that every new level has a new devil. And there's different challenges because you came in at one location, eventually scaled it to 700 before you left. There's different challenges between scaling from 0 to 10 locations than there is 50 to 100, then 100 to 700. What were the different challenges that you faced at every step? And is there someone that you brought in to help you scale?
But that was an important point where we brought in someone who had worked for McDonald's, and McDonald's was if you talk about mentor, I read several books on McDonald's. It's an incredible story. But again, what they offer, is very much what a gym offered in terms of being a friendly, well-maintained, well-equipped place. In their case, they have a product. But we hired somebody who had also gone on to McKinsey, which back then was a really highly regarded consulting company. They're a little tarnished now, but still sort of good. And we hired him to look at our franchise fees because people were beginning to charge. Other competitors were charging what I thought were high franchise fees. So I wanted to know from an expert what we could reasonably charge and get away with. And he came up with a number. And that's why I think so many of the gym franchise out there now are overpriced, because they're charging what fast food charges, 7% maybe of gross revenue. Well, if you're not making any money, that's hurts. And we don't. McDonald's, they're your landlord typically, and most gym franchises don't do as much for a gym owner as what, say, a fast food company does. I mean, McDonald's pretty much does it all. We did end up having it. We in 1997 we opened a Gold's Gym University. So at some point, when we started, there was no manual. We were inventing a new business, and over time, we thought we got to a manual that was ridiculous. Over time, we thought we knew enough. We had to pass that knowledge on to our owners, or we were basically negligent or immoral. Even, you have to help your franchises succeed, and at some point, you've got to share as much as you know. But in the beginning, there was nothing. So it got more sophisticated as we grew.
So in the beginning, it starts off, it's probably just you and your founders, your co-founders, just, scaling the franchises yourself with everything. You're figuring it out yourself. And then you start to build a manual. Right. And at what point did you start to offer franchising to other people? Quite
a few. I was the first franchise in 1980, 45 years ago. But we didn't really start franchising the entire country until 1996. There were some states where we couldn't go into because, like New York State, because they didn't recognize the difference between a license and a franchise, and that's the difference. A franchise, you have a business plan, you have a trademark, you're charging a fee for the use of that, and you have a business plan. A license doesn't necessarily have a business plan attached, but at some point we thought we knew enough that we had to give our owners a manual. And in a school.
So what I find really interesting is you guys did offer franchising, but there's also another model, and it's a different industry, but Chipotle, for example, they own all of their stores. Right. They're privately owned. Yeah. Why did you guys decide to ultimately go the franchise route versus going privately owned?
Because we're in a real service business, not food. I remember I met with the founder of P.F. Chang's in Santa Monica many, many years ago, and he asked my advice about and same way with Jane Fonda too. Asked my advice about franchising, and I said, no, you should own them all, because you're dealing there with a food product, which you've got, like McDonald's, which you've got to keep consistent. I mean, they've done it with franchising, but they have a lot of company-owned stores too. But no, we want local people who can build community, and I don't think you can do that. I mean, God bless the big chains in America that are, have hundreds, but they're all over the place now too, because I don't think you can replicate that same quality of service with a franchise in this industry. And think about it, how many businesses are there like a gym business? It's so much about people.
I wanted to talk real quick about your ingredients to success. You've talked about hard work, perseverance, team building, but one of these that we talked about earlier was luck. Mm-hmm. How big of a factor was luck for you in your success?
It was huge. And again, I've read a lot of autobiographies, and that always comes up. I just saw someone the other day wrote Barry Diller just came out with a book, and he's the luckiest man alive.
What was an instance in your career when you're growing golds that was just pure luck that you can attribute?
Finding the building. If we'd been trapped in Santa Monica and never gotten that building in Venice that happened to be like an accordion file where you could just expand over 9 years to 26,000, we would have been dead, I think. There were other gyms that came in to compete with us, but they were smaller and couldn't grow. So we could grow in place. That was incredible luck.
As you were growing, I'm sure that you had a lot of competitors come in. Did you have a lot of copycats that were coming in as well?
People began to copy, but they were either smaller or couldn't grow.
And they also, I don't think, were probably as adaptable as you.
No.
You were committed to change.
Yeah.
What is it at every level, at every new year, every new decade? How did you keep on innovating and staying on top of the trends that were coming in the fitness industry?
When Pete, Tim, and I bought the gym in '79, there wasn't one bike in the gym. Cardio was unknown, and I saw people riding bikes on Venice Beach. And it's one of my favorite activities. And I said, well, we ought to bring this inside for the days it rains. So that became, initially we put the bikes on top of the restroom in the first room and then the maintenance shed, because it's a boring activity. And this way you could be kind of entertained watching people on the gym floor. And so, later on when big screen TVs became in existence, we put them in a separate room with a big TV. We called it bikes in front of the TV. Now that someone trademarked it as cardio theater, but that's how this evolved. And I remember when I actually have letters I got, death threats of putting in aerobics in Gold's Gym Venice. How could the Mecca have aerobics, have female members like that? And that was important. That was an important part of getting women into the gym and taking over from what Jane Fonda started.
There's a big change there. You said you pretty much pioneered co-ed gyms.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to make that a key component of Gold's Gym, and what were some of the challenges you kind of dealt with that?
We knew part of the membership back when we bought the gym were quite a few female bodybuilders, and like the Gold's Gym in Santa Monica really didn't even have a restroom for them. So we knew right from the beginning that we had to accommodate the women. Back in the day, and again, people almost can't imagine this, but the typical Jack LaLanne European Health Spa, those kind of clubs, it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday were men, Tuesday, Thursday was women, Saturday was co-ed, and the gym was closed on Sunday. So I said, well, this is nuts. This is America. And again, we rode. I was lucky in a way. I mean, I rode, I was at Berkeley during free speech riots. I was at Vietnam. I, came out with the health craze, feeling good about yourself. The Ronald Reagan boom years. So all these, women's lib was huge. So these were all what would you call them? Generational moments that we were part of, and we embraced. I mean, we mandated the gyms be open 7 days a week and be co-ed. And I remember gym owners had crosses burned in front of their facilities in the South because we were getting, people thought women were going to get raped in the gym. And I don't know. We never had an issue. We never had a lawsuit.
How old are you now?
80.
You're one of the sharpest. I think you're the sharpest damn 80-year-old I've ever seen. How do you stay so sharp, so young, and so fit at 80 years old?
I eat 2 meals a day, breakfast and happy hour, and I try to walk 12,000 steps and get exercise or swimming in when I can, and get 8 hours sleep. I think most of the people I know don't get enough sleep. If you can get a power nap during the day, and that was one of my reasons for my new gym concept, is to build facilities within these shared office like this, where if you're working in a shared office space for 10 hours, and I showed it to Tony Robbins, he said, Ed, I think people would join just to have take a shower or take a power nap. I would have sleep rooms in the facility. Wow. Besides the virtual training, because I think, you want to make the places make sense, useful.
We had interviewed a guy named Brian Johnson. He has this goal to not die. The number one thing that he said was, in order, like for an entrepreneur to take care of your health, is the sleep component of that. Right. So I think it's really awesome. I wanted to ask you for, anybody wanting to get into the gym industry today, because you've had probably the most pivotal career in the gym space over the course of your career. For somebody wanting to get into the gym industry today, what would your advice be to them?
I've actually consulted recently with a number of people with that same goal. People who are passionate about fitness. And actually before COVID, I would have said, don't do it. It's a scary world. But now, actually you can see it in LA. There are a lot of what I call pop-up gyms where what's kind of old, it's like Back to the Future. What's old is new again. Where the smaller gyms like the original Gold's Gym now work because the big box gyms are in trouble. Because the baby boomers aren't going back in the same numbers. So they're trying to reposition a lot of their space. But for someone, like you guys, to find a 10,000 square foot building or smaller and open up your own gym now makes sense. And these are more personal training style gyms where I see owners getting as much as $70, $80 a month. So again, what's changed is the membership pricing structure, the square footage, but it actually could be a very good time, especially if you can go into an older facility that closed during COVID and has all the shower facility, which is all the money, all the cost. So I've seen that happen in various places right now in the U.S.
In this era of your life, how important has God been for you? How important is faith?
I'm still going to church. I'm not I'm not happy with the Catholic Church and a lot of the way things have been handled. But I think everybody needs. I was also going to a therapist most of my life. I think everybody needs, an hour with their creator and an hour perhaps with talking to somebody about the week they've just lived through. So I think that's whether you believe in a God or not. I think you owe it to yourself to somehow, an hour a week of meditation or just analyzing what your life is like and who your interactions have been with is valuable.
And we like to end these podcasts off with 2 questions. If you have one guiding principle for the younger generation, what would that be? 80 years of life of numerous careers. Like I like to say, numerous lifetimes in one. Give them one guiding principle that they can take with them for the rest of their lives.
Be sociable and take risks.
I love it.
Wow. And so, like you said, 80 years of life, absolutely tremendous. How do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered for improving the quality of people's lives and helping them live longer. Yeah. I
love it. Well, Ed, this was a pleasure for us to get to spend the day with you and hang out with you. It means the world to us. We're very thankful for you, and we got to learn a lot from you today.
Well, thank you.
You also have a new book that's coming out. Can you talk a little bit about that and the name of the book?
Well, during COVID, I used the opportunity to write a book. So now, besides being gym owner, architect, I can also be a memorist. And it was a really fun, and I would encourage everyone to maybe keep a diary. I didn't keep a diary. I wish I had. But we all have a book inside of us, and it was a great experience. And it never really felt like work. It was very enjoyable. Unfortunately, I took typing in high school, and that's one thing that my private school wouldn't teach. And I thought, well, this might be valuable. I went to a tech school, a public school during the summer to learn it. But, if you can type fast, it's so much fun to write a book because you keep reworking it. And it was a wonderful experience. And I reconnected with a lot of former house guests, which was great. John Cena wrote a beautiful foreword. So
love it.
I designed the cover. I'm proud of it.
Hey, well, we're proud of you, Ed. and I got to say, thank you so much once again. Everybody watching, we'll put the links down to the description to get a copy of Ed's book, as well as where we can find you out on social media. That way we can keep following your journey. Everybody watching right now, we appreciate you. Be sure to like and subscribe for incredible content and interviews every week with the most successful people in the world, just like Ed Connors. As I mentioned earlier, guys, we've built the #1 community for business owners in the entire world, the School of Mentors. So if you want access to the minds and the skills of the millionaires and billionaires we interview every week on live calls, just go down to the link in the description of this video to join today, along with the links to tap in with Ed. We can't wait to see you on the inside of our community. And with that being said, we'll see you in the next episode.